Save the juicy stuff till I get back.
Everything is. Like I'll try to postpone this. So obviously, I have a lot of thoughts in regards to training for arm wrestling. Some of them standard, some of them a little bit controversial. Um, I've only ever really focused on table time training. It isn't, I've last year after nationals, I started to do gym stuff. This was the first time ever in my life that I've done gym stuff. So I've been doing that almost a year now. So I've gotten a good feel of what benefits there are from, gym training versus table time training. Obviously, I specialize in table time training. Gym stuff, I should and could be better about tracking weights, reps, sets, lifts, and stuff. Partially the reason why I don't so much is I'm a little bit lazy, but also I think one of the biggest problems with arm wrestling training, especially in gym, is the focus and emphasis on improving the number that is the weight on that lift, to where people tend to forget that arm wrestling is a combat sport, not a weightlifting sport. There's a distinct difference. Obviously, it's one of the combat sports where strength is the determining factor compared to something else. A boxer isn't determined by who can hit the hardest, but the more skills into it. Versus arm wrestling, who can lift the most tends to win, but not always. So that's one problem I see is the focus on these lifts and improving the numbers. And oftentimes we see those numbers don't always equate to the table. So now that Kane's back, I'll get back into briefly what I do for table time training and how
I
I
was
break
listening
down.
to every word too.
Okay.
That was really cool. I like that outlook in terms of like tracking weight and stuff like that. Interesting.
So table time, I got this written down. It's very simple. Obviously, this is a blueprint for what I do. And I think it's a good blueprint for anyone to do, pick what they need according to their schedules. Like how I practice leading up to, let's say, a tournament, depending on what level tournament is going to be different than how I practice leading up to a super match versus how I'm just having an average practice in the off season, quote unquote. So first
I
thing I
love
like to
you.
do at practice is a warm up and slash stretching. So obviously we're familiar with, what is an arm wrestling warm up. You go at the table, you loosen up the wrists, this back and forth, side to side. Basically all the arm wrestling vectors, just moving it, getting it loose. Also, depending on certain injuries, I'll incorporate some other stretches. So now that my elbow is a little issue, I'll get to some band work and properly get that stretched out, open, ready to go. All this is done very lightly, just to get everything moving. So after that whole period of warm up stretching is done, I like to go into the next phase of practice, which I consider the strength and conditioning aspect. So for strength conditioning, is basically what everyone else does at the gym in terms of their lifts, their working sets, their reps, stuff. I do at the table with another person. So in strength and conditioning, it's not really any technique involved. So let's say I'm working like a rising pressure. So similar like you would do in a gym, however you work that pressure, I'm doing that at the table with a person. Depending on what workout I had during the week, it'll affect, how many reps I'm doing this, how much sets and how much intensity. The difference is that you don't get a specific measure of what the weight you're moving is with a person compared to a machine. It's very calculated. But what you get instead is that neurological connection at the table with a person. And it's very important to notice about table time training. Everything you do at the table with a person, whether it's very disciplined, organized, and structured, to those ridiculous, stupid end of the practice you're hanging from under the table, everything you have to do at the table translates 100% at the table to a possible match, just because it is in that realm of table. Compared to gym training, one of the things I really want to emphasize is not is the assumption that what you do in the gym translates to the table. That because you're doing these arm wrestling specific lifts, that therefore that strength automatically, inherently is going to make you better at the table when that is not true. Okay, there are a lot of guys that can outlift me in arm wrestling specific lifts easily, but we get to the table and it's not the case. Yes, doing arm wrestling training lifts will get you strong in those vectors, but it's important to note That just because you're strong there doesn't mean that's going to translate to the table. You have to do it at the table in order to that work. So strength and conditioning, that's that's that step. Then after that aspect, I go into technique work. And I think obviously this is very important. There's a saying that people use is, gym time for strength building, table time for technique work. I hear this from everyone's practice from here in the United States to overseas. And the
Yep.
problem with this aspect is nobody actually does this. They say they do it, but when I'm watching everyone's practices, when I'm watching what they're doing, they're not doing it properly. And that's one thing arm wrestlers have a big problem out is learning and training techniques. When new guys come to me, I'm always the easiest to work with because it's simpler and they're not used to it. Because normally, when people work in technique, you get one guy, the veteran at the table, holding him center, and you got about a dozen other guys circling around him, telling him what to do, how to move like this. So that guy is one trying to fight strength wise and also do that technique, and it just completely overwhelms him. So how I train my technique, whether it's at a table with a person, if I have that, or just by myself at the table, like that shadow boxing, is that it's important to be completely your opponent, whoever you're training with, completely relaxed, completely limp, no pressure, no fatigue, nothing. You're not working out the muscle movement at all. It's just the motion. It needs to be done very slowly, very methodically, you're thinking as you're doing this, and you drill these rep after rep after rep after rep till you're no longer thinking about it. And the importance of doing it without any resistance, any pressure, is you're building that second nature. So when I'm top rolling, I don't have to think about where my wrist moves, whether my wrist is like posting high, whether it's going low, whether my elbow is on the inside, whether it's on the outside, back here, center, back there. Every motion, every possible way that configuration goes, I've trained it till ad nauseum, till I'm sick of it. I don't have to think. So that's how I like to train technique. And obviously, everyone knows how to top roll. Everyone knows how to hook. Everyone knows how to press. They're basic fundamentals. But when you break it down like this and start training it, you realize there is a whole lot more to these top rolls, hooks, presses than you would think. Just subtle shifts in how your hand is placed and how it moves makes a big difference. But that leads me to the next part of practice is the strategy. The technique and strategy aspect kind of blend into each other. But after I go through the motions of the technique, it's important to understand how this technique actually works. It's one thing going through the motion, but when it's against someone who's completely relaxed, no resistance, you're wondering, okay, if I'm going to low hand, where is this pressure being applied? How does this actually work? So that's where the strategy aspect of it comes in. Now, in this part, we're still doing minimal resistance. We're not fatiguing the muscle. If you start to feel your muscle like tense up at all, you're using way too much force. It's only to get that tactile knowledge of, okay, so when I move like, oh, okay, pressure's being applied right here, right here. And if I move, that's where it is. So I'm going to adjust, okay, pressure I'm feeling here. So that's how I work the strategy aspect of the technique to understand why it is I would want to top roll, why it is I'd want to hook, where these pressures are being applied for defensive maneuvers and also offensive maneuvers. So obviously, strategy, go into depth of that. Another aspect of practice after that, I like to go into my setups and positions. So when I step up to the table, how am I setting up? Where is my elbow going to be placed? Where are my feet going to be placed? Am I going to hook? Am I going to top roll? And all this is can be completely, again, relaxed, no pressure, no tension. It's just how are you feeling when you step up to this position? Because a lot of people, I think, have this idea of, they go to the table, their setup is the exact same, doesn't matter their opponent, doesn't anything, which there's a benefit to that. You get into this rhythm, you don't have to think about it at all. It's just everything is the same, repetition, repetition. The problem with that is you get into this mindset of things have to be a certain way. And it doesn't take much to get thrown off that game plan, or someone sets up differently and you're a fish out of water, you have no idea what to move. Versus we're just practicing how you're setting up, where that grip is. Again, not arm wrestling at all, just setting up so that no matter what opponent you get in, you can recognize certain patterns. Okay, he's setting up like this. I know he's going in for an inside press or a hook, or he's setting up because he's going to low hand. That comes from just practicing going to the table and setting up. Another important aspect is the actual start, that hit, that ready go, that training. That is probably the hardest thing to learn because what you got to do is unlearn movement. The best hits are the ones that are automatic responses, reflex reaction, no thought at all. Because it's a proven fact that a reaction time is faster than an action time, based on the fact that, an action requires an impulse from your brain, signal to your hand to move, hand receives signal, sends back, okay, we're moving. Obviously, fractions of a second is slower than my hand moving automatically without me thinking about it, without me telling it to move. That's the basic premise of that hit. Training that is very difficult because obviously, as much as we like to, we always think about it. So the best way I've found to train this is just one, you be it by yourself or with a partner, completely relaxed again. Is just moving my arm at the table, distract myself, look somewhere else, talk to somebody, and just move. Just get my arm moving. So over and over to where I'm not even thinking about moving my arm and slowly get faster, faster, just moving it. Don't worry about technique or anything. Just get in the process of having your arm move without thinking about it. So after that aspect of getting the idea of reacting, another way I like to train is just similar to that, just moving, is just hitting over and over again. No one's saying ready, go, no timer, no buzzer, nothing. Just moving full speed. And it's very important to be mindful of the aspect of, am I tensing up as I'm going in? Because you're going to tense up without even thinking about it. That's going to slow you down because you got to send those impulses to tense up, load up, and then move. Those fractions of a just second are determined against someone like me who moves without even thinking. So just hitting, just going into it. A good way to train hits with a person is one person, again, this isn't full force, full contact, but you're going to hit. One person moves, the other person reacts. So it's just a little. So if I'm gripping up with someone, I do this. I love this training because it's easy to catch people off guard and what they're doing wrong. So it's here. I'll just like that or just that. And as soon as you feel anything, you move, you hit. Obviously, it doesn't have to be to the pen pad or anything. It's just that impulse, that reaction. You do this over and over and over and over and over and over. One person moves, the other person reacts. And eventually, what does happen, happens to me all the time at times, is you get, uh, you anticipate that movement. So without even knowing it, you're tensing up, waiting. And what I'll do to test someone if they're really being focused is I'll tense another part of my body. So I'm over here holding the hand peg. I'll be tensing this side, but not my hand. They'll fire off from that because they're anticipating that rather than just close your eyes. As soon as you feel something completely relaxed, move. And I think it's important with this hit training, being fast or having a fast hit, is dispelling the notion that there are slow pullers and there are fast pullers.
Yeah, I
This
hate.
is not true.
Yeah.
The reason why is that reaction. If you have a kid or someone, nephew, niece, son, daughter, and they happen to dart into the street, a car comes in, how quickly you move without even thinking about it, no matter how big you are to get to that situation compared to some other thing. So you got to get yourself in that mindset of just impulse, reaction, not even thinking, like the doctor tapping your knee at the office. You're just moving without thinking. So that is obviously, there's a lot into that hit, but it's important to break down difference between speed and that quick hit. Because
Right.
some guys will think, oh, this person's insanely fast. Look how fast I pinned them. When the truth is, speed is determined by what's the formula? Distance traveled divided by the force applied or time or something like that. Basically, if you want to be faster, just be stronger. If I go against a 5-year-old, like how fast can I move that arm compared to you, Kane? I can't move you much at all. Is it because I'm slower? No, it's not true. It's just the force I'm applying is not enough to overcome the force that I'm being resisted against. But then you ask yourself, well, how am I, someone who's weaker than a lot of my opponents, able to quickly pin them, even though I'm weaker. Again, it's by the time that pin happens, you're getting that reaction. Oh, it's time to move. It's time to apply my force. So
Right.
no laws of physics are being broken, but my hit is occurring before you're applying that force backwards. And that just comes with impulse. That briefly, if you consider that brief, is the key to getting that hit. So after that aspect of table time training, I like to go into controlled ready goes. So in a controlled ready go, everything's square setup, everything. The object isn't necessarily to pin. If you can get the pin, great. If you can't, once that stop hits, you guys work that position out. If you're finding you're just beating your opponent off the go too often, there's no stopping. You hit to a certain position, then work from there. So these are ready goes, but they're more controlled, they're more structured. We're working different angles, different positions, just a rough scrimmage. Then after that aspect, we like to go into a live ready go, full contact to the pin, and so forth. And this one briefly is not so much focused. Like we're not going to call fouls or things unless they're egregious. This is just to test that brute force you're able to apply. When that match starts, that surge, that second surge. After we get from there, I like to go into very strict ready goes, live ready goes, where we are going to call fouls. We're going to call these things like that. We're going to go into a test a referee's grip out. We're going to apply the strap. After, so I like to save these at the end of practice just for me because I have good endurance and it really hammers because most of my strength and conditioning build is at the start of practice. All that heavy stuff is towards the beginning. All this is just ancillary work that I like to incorporate. And I think this important is very next stop. The last thing is very important, especially for newer pullers, is a deload or a cool down. So after you're done throughout practice, instead of just being cold and stopping forever,
Right.
is get back at the table and just minimal force is all. Just get back into the motion, get a little blood flow going. So on your car ride home, it's not a complete shock. Just that brief cool down helps a lot in getting that recovery for the next day to where it's not a just cold stop and my arm's destroyed.
Right.
So that's briefly as a blueprint of how I like to structure for me, how I like to practice. Obviously, everyone else is different, different situations, different scenarios, but I think I find this as to be a useful blueprint. People can take what they want from it, what they find useful. So that briefly is how I like to do table time training. And for everyone knowing, I train at the table every week. And so we have practices here locally Thursday evenings. Then I will go, whether it's the Bay Area, Turlock, or somewhere further up north where I practice Saturday. Practice for us is about 6, and I'm pulling until 10 p.m. So about 4 hours plus an additional 3 to 4 hours on the weekend. So I'm getting about roughly 8 to 10 hours table time training every week. And for some people hearing that, it's like, well, that's way too much. That's an insane amount. But if you listen to how I structure my training out, it's never too much. And I
It's
think that's the
not
thing. Like,
arm wrestling like everybody else.
yeah, if you have a practice and once, maybe twice a month, and the reason is because your arms are just destroyed, you can't recover, you're not training in a helpful manner. It's like saying, if someone goes to the gym only once a week and you ask them why, it's well, because I'm just so destroyed after that. And you just question, are they really training in a productive or safe manner if just one thing throws them out for that long?
Right. Yeah, if they're
Yeah,
lucky, they
I
might be
agree with
getting
that.
some strength gains out of it, but for the most part, it's kind of like conditioning, like maybe your tendons and your muscles and joints are getting used to like always feeling like they're getting hit by a, big rig truck. But there's a little bit of conditioning, but it's not very productive to technique and strength
Oh,
gains.
briefly, if I could touch back on some of the training, is because there's that always aspect. It's like for me, yeah, it's easy for me to do a lot of this training because I'm the smallest, weakest guy there. Versus, like say, Dare, for example, biggest guy, nobody can match him. How can you really get that much out of a table time practice compared to the gym? And that's a problem, but it's important to really train at the table primarily. And it's important that if you are stronger, like sometimes, a lot of times, my hit is too much for the guys that practice. Even though they're strong enough to catch it, it just that shock on their tendons is too much. So what we do is incorporate the use of a band, have it wrapped around the shoulder, through the hand or arm, depending what we're working. That way, we're able to get good table time training, good hits, good movements. That's both beneficial for both because it's the aspect of, the senior holds, the junior pulls aspect. The problem with that is a lot of times it's good isometric training, but too often the person holding has their wrist bent like this, and the other person really can't work much. So whenever I'm holding, I'm always cognizant of the fact that I got to give everything to them, have them earn it, but like I can't have my wrist cupped. I got to give it all the way out, have them go through the whole range of motion holding. But having the band aspect allows them to, we're going full at it. I'm giving my best effort in these positions and there. And if bands aren't enough, my favorite thing to use is just the other hand. I love training bigger guys with the second hand because even in smaller guys, it saves my arm extra fatigue, but it allows me to specifically pinpoint certain vectors, certain areas to target. Versus like, okay, if we're going to train here, I'll pull back here. So that's going to work that radial deviation more than me just trying to do it myself. Versus I can really crack down on your pronator and some of these bigger guys to where they can't really get somewhere. So incorporating another hand in the training aspect will really help fine tune these certain aspects, these certain angles to strengthen that you can't necessarily get strengthened at the gym just because it's just such that odd little spot.
Yeah, this is great, man. I'm definitely gonna clip this, by the way.
Oh, I mean,
Absolutely.
Yes.
I don't want to hog the spot and go into like gym training or like tournament prep beforehand, but I mean, I can.
Nah. No, I think we
Appreciate how
can.
well spoken you are.
Yeah,
I
very
agree with
articulate.